Hello everyone, and welcome back to another edition of Indexer Office Hours. Today is the 27th of August, and this is Indexer Office Hours 172. If anyone is new to Indexer Office Hours, and there are a few new faces, welcome. This is the town square where graph ecosystem participants come together and discuss the most important and relevant topics for indexers. As always, this is a conversation and we love participation, so if you'd like to get involved in today's conversation, please do via text in the corner over here or try unmuting a mic. If you're having any challenges unmuting a mic, let me know. I will get that sorted for you. As a reminder, this is a session that's going to be recorded and posted onto public channels like YouTube. So if you are concerned about privacy, please bear that in mind. And with that, let's get into today's agenda. So as usual, we give a shout out to the latest GRTIQ episode. And this is GRTIQ episode 183 with 𝗨𝗀𝗂𝗪, if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, who's the founder of Electron Labs. And Electron Labs is a Web3 solution focused on solving the bottleneck of Ethereum scaling by using zero knowledge proofs. So this podcast was quite interesting. He has a very interesting background. You know, he's originally from India, New Delhi. Talks about his previous experience building in the Web3 space. He had a company called Fraction 0x. Talks about how he learned all the things he learned from building that company and how that has influenced his new project. And also talks about the Web3 data space, mentioning the graph and stuff like that. So if you're interested in the episode, go do check it out over there. Thank you for posting, Juan, and also thank you for posting the agenda. Alrighty, with that, let's hand over to Anna for our regularly scheduled repo watch section.
Thank you, Abel, and hello everyone. So today we have a light repo watch, so let's get right into it. Starting with execution layer clients, we have had a new release of Firehose Ethereum. This is version 2.7.0. Some things here. So this release enhances Firehose and substreams by introducing new endpoint information services and implementing a well-known chain list, which just automates and standardizes chain identification. Some other updates include chain-specific advertising features, improved startup validation, and some performance optimizations for substreams, plus bug fixes. All right. Then next is Arbitrum Nitro. It has had a couple of release candidates for version 3.1.1, but because they also released the stable 3.1.1, we'll just cover 3.1.1. So this stable release enhances the stylus support, adds fast confirmation capabilities, introduces an experimental PathDB support, and improve antitrust, DAS, and validator stability. It also comes with some configuration changes and internal optimization that are aimed to enhance performance and security. And this is fresh like 2 hours ago. Okay, and then that's it for execution layer clients. Moving on to consensus layer clients. Here we have had a new release of Prism. This is version 5.10. And this release introduces support or significant support for the Electra Ethereum upgrade changes and adds new features like multiple beacon nodes support in the REST API and other performance optimization. Here there's a deprecation that's worth including, which is the planned removal of the gRPC gateway and renaming of all associated flags. So please make sure to check the release notes carefully. And it also includes key bug fixes that address issues with sync committee performance and slasher database discuses. And then we have nothing for GraphStack. And quickly checking chat. We have nothing in the chat, so over to you, Juan. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Okay, getting into Protocol Watch. we technically don't have a ton to cover, but it's a huge page. So getting into forum governance, we have both GAP 66 and 68, which are Graph Horizon data service protocol and subgraph service, a subgraph data service in Graph Horizon. Both are, intrinsically linked to each other, or rather one depends on the other. If you're interested in any of those, they are pretty lengthy. They are linked in the agenda, and in the forum thread, you have a link to another documentation. Many of you already know about Horizon, so we're not going to reintroduce it, but the links are in the agenda. We don't have anything for forum research, but we do have about 40 different PRs in the contracts repository. All of them are somehow linked to Horizon. They're mostly fixes and changes that are a result of the latest rounds of audits from OpenZeppelin, as far as I can see. So yeah, if you're interested in all of the changes that have been done, they're also all linked in the agenda. And for the network subgraphs, we don't have any new updates, fortunately. So that's pretty much it for 𝗨𝗀𝗧. Given that I seen Paka in the chat somewhere, I'm gonna be handing over to Paka now.
Everyone, quick session for me. Just wanted to call out, we had an indexer components release yesterday, 0.2.1.4. I'd encourage you all to check that out. Let us know how it works for you. Besides that, just kind of heads down, working in EdgeNode, and hopefully we'll have some exciting GraphNode features to share shortly. But that's all I really got. Hope you're all doing well, and good to be back.
Wonderful, wonderful. We've got a
Sorry,
question. Yeah, sorry.
I also have a question, or more like a comment. The release notes show this release is released in July, so I'm not sure how that works, but that's confusing.
It's because GitHub doesn't actually update your release if you make edits. It just takes the first date of publish, unfortunately. And so we've been modifying that release. And so I think that's why it might be slightly confusing.
Okay, thank you.
All right, wonderful. Now I will hand the mic to Nick for a few announcements.
Before I begin, can I please get a okay, let's go?
Okay, let's go.
Perfect. That is hands down my favorite one. Thanks, Abel. Shout out Indexer office hours. I love Indexer office hours, and 170 is 72 is so cool. I'm looking at Wave5's avatar there, and I'm just remembering those early days with Jim probably doing Indexer office hours #1. So awesome. So thanks for the mic for a second here. My job today is to be the marketing guy for the foundation and drive some traffic to the core dev call on Thursday. So, usually these are updates from the core dev teams, and we don't push too strongly on directing traffic to these things, but this week we want to. There will be 2 updates that we think are relevant to indexers as well as developers building in the ecosystem. One update will be related to Horizon and what's going on with that initiative. I know there were some audits completed recently, so EdgeNode will be providing some more information about Horizon. I hope everybody here kind of knows what Horizon is. If not, I'll scramble to find the blog post link and post it in the chat here in a moment when I'm done talking. And then the second thing is exploring then subgraph data services in a Horizon environment. So I, despite being on the marketing team, have grown nauseous at the word migration, because I think, if anything, the graph has definitely trademarked this word, this verbiage, migration. But for the sake of staying consistent, it would be a discussion of migrating the subgraph data service into a Horizon type environment. So I think that would be something of interest to indexers and developers as well. So please attend, and I appreciate everybody posting links, but please attend if you can this Thursday's core dev call. That is my pitch, And with that, shout out all the indexers at the graph, and back to you, Abel.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the announcements there. Yeah, you heard it there. Fresh news. Alrighty, so in keeping with our Postgres theme that we've been rocking with these past couple of weeks, we're super fortunate to have folks in the EduNode team come and join us today to do a presentation on just that and answer all your questions. We have John. I won't spend too long with the introduction. I'll let John do it for himself, a new member of EduNode. John, feel free to grab the mic and take it away.
All right, thanks, Abel. Okay, first let's get this screen shared here. All right, is that readable for everybody?
It is indeed, yes.
Excellent, thanks. All right, well, let's get Mickey. So I'm on Mickey's team at EduNode. I am a freshly minted DBA there, so to speak. I've been around for about 3 months. And it's very good to meet all of you. I'll be right up front. I mean, it's going to be a little intimidating for me here. I've listened to some of the presentations already. I've lurked on the channel a bit, watched some of the YouTube videos over the last few months, and just following Derek's presentations recently on some of the query stuff and the information that Lutter's shared over the years. Actually, it's a tough act to follow. And also the stack of technology that you all are dealing with is just mind-blowing. So my thoughts of running an indexer on the side soon evaporated after I got here. I have more than enough to do with our databases. So without further ado, yeah, let's get into this. I had a really grandiose plan to have like some great 𝗨𝗀𝗂𝗧 type of presentation and all that, but you're getting a markdown presentation, and that's where I landed. I was working on this right up to the last minute because once I started brain dumping, it became kind of a snowball. But all right, so my name's 𝗨𝗀𝗂𝗧𝗨𝗂𝗧𝗧. I've been working with Postgres for about 10 years after I moved to it from Oracle. If anybody would like to connect on LinkedIn or on GitHub or anything like that, please feel free. Would love to get to know a lot of you better, or especially with regard to anybody who's dealing with the database stuff. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but a little tongue-in-cheek humor, as long as we stick to calling this Postgres or PostgreSQL, we'll get along just fine. Should anybody revert to PostgreSQL or PSQL in referring to the database just once, and well, we won't discuss where that will lead to. All right, moving on. Today's agenda. So really, how I want to come at this is how we all, including myself, can work together to become better GraphNode DBAs. Because running Postgres is one thing. There's like a vanilla kind of setup as far as like a starting point for production systems, but then you get into tweaking for specific and configuring for specific workloads. And we are definitely a unique situation, the way that we use our database, any database, whether it was Postgres or not. It's just very unique what we do. So, what I'm hoping to bring to the table today is coming from the direction of kind of the vanilla 101 level perspective for infrastructure and architecture of Postgres, and to leading to kind of a level setting between all of us of, hey, here are some thoughts on how the Postgres community in general tends to set things up to get going. And then, we're going to have a learning process together over months and years to continue to improve this and build out configurations that are specifically good for graph nodes on Postgres. And probably the joke that Mickey's tired of hearing is, the way that we use Postgres now, even within EduNode, and how we've grown tremendously and organically in our databases, is that even with all the brilliant people on staff, we're guilty of elephant abuse. Like the way that we do this is just it's kind of nasty. It's a lot of room for improvement on all fronts. And I'm still learning all of the patterns on how we use things. So, that goes into hey, today we're gonna be sticking with infrastructure and architecture kind of stuff. I do want to go, mainly with the low hanging fruit of what kind of things can give us a big impact without a lot of effort and not a lot of risk of screwing up your systems. So I will talk a lot in terms of rules of thumb. That is kind of the bread and butter of even when I used to work for Enterprise DB and the Pro Services Group, and a lot of what we did with customers back then, that was like 10 years ago, was really the rule of thumb settings to start from, so that their systems were on a solid foundation to improve from there. So we talk about rules of thumb. They are not carved in stone. Even some of my friends and colleagues in the space that I still am in frequent contact with, we have a little bit different take on various settings. So what I'm sharing is absolutely not gospel. I'll toss in anything that comes to mind along the way. And this is just another disclaimer. I am not going to be able to keep an eye on the chat as this goes. So if you need something, just interject, blurt it out and interrupt me. Otherwise, it's going to be more towards the end before I have a chance to scan through this. And I do plan to come up with, I don't know what method we'll use yet, but I'll share this markdown document, after we're done with all this. So a few thoughts before we get rolling. I firmly believe, and it's already kind of alluded to it, that the better we collectively become at this with Postgres, this being, in a way kind of self-aggrandizing, being a Postgres DBA, but I mean, it's the foundation underneath everything, right? I mean, it affects everything about how the graph performs. So as we get better at this together, we're all going to, the rising tide floats all boats kind of thing. I definitely want to slowly become more involved with the indexers to bounce ideas off of each other and see what we learn and improve in this space. Definitely everybody who's running one of these things is going to come up with an idea or find something over time that's going to be like, hey, we never thought of that. That's great. So definitely want to encourage participation as we move forward. Going to guarantee somebody's going to stump me. This is a vast space, just Postgres on its own, let alone Postgres in the graph space. And definitely there are going to be a lot of it depends or to be determined kind of things. So what we'll try to come away with out of this, I'll watch this later and cringe at the sound of my own voice, but I want to come away from this with what more, where should we head from here, and what kind of things should we be studying, and what should I be thinking about, as we move forward at Edge and Node itself, with our databases that might inform or aid the indexing community if we figure out something on our side. All right, and lastly, and I'll give an example of this little quick anecdote in a few minutes, but do not take what I suggest or what I recommend or bring to your attention and just apply it. I have no joke, I have seen it to bring companies to their knees. Like they stopped operating for hours that day, if not longer. So be forewarned. Okay, so I got quite a list of questions from Abel. Thank you very much. That helped tremendously. And so we'll just roll through these and see where we get. I tried to give them some sort of a logical order, but it's not quite. So just to kind of start at the top, I thought, all right, let's move this question to the top. Hey, what are best practices for PostgreSQL config tuning? Great question. Okay, so what we've done, or what I did in the past, especially, I spent a lot of time as in the consulting type of role, but then plenty of also roles, permanently within companies, so to speak. And you want to take these rule of thumb ideas and implement them usually gradually, unless you've got the luxury of, I've got a copy of all this. I've got like a clone of this server, and I have the luxury of shutting that thing down and taking the clone, changing all the configuration, and just running with it and see what happens. You want to be careful about this stuff when you put it in. And I don't want to overstate it. I mean, Lord knows I've definitely gone YOLO on more than one occasion and just said, yeah, I think this will be fine. But when I'm making recommendations to other people, I definitely want to, wave that flag of caution, to take your time putting these in. So you take them, you put them in, usually one at a time, not always, but usually, and take the time to observe how it affects your system. Are your queries running faster? How is the memory being used? How does the CPU load look? That kind of basic stuff, to just have a feeling for, did I benefit the system or not? Because there are so many knobs and dials to turn in Postgres and the operating system that it's overwhelming. And if you don't go at it piecemeal, you usually won't have a good idea of, well, really what made that change, which change made this work. And without that, you don't know if, like, well, you could improve it further, because you don't know which change made it work, because maybe you changed something about how the disks are mounted and some memory settings at the same time. So that's the example there. I like to point out, now, this is kind of a strange thing in our space. We don't really get to tune queries like you normally do, where there's like an application and there's a dev team you're working with and all that. It's like people just throw queries at our systems, and you don't get to really work with them. But there are things we can do, and we'll talk about that. But what I like to say is, when it comes to the configuration and architecture, as you dial those things in, what your problem queries are will change. So you end up kind of chasing your tail. It's like, maybe just dial in the config and architecture as best you can, or maybe get the biggest bang you can for your buck and do the rest later, before you really start looking at too much at queries. But again, in our space, it's kind of odd, and indexes are an important thing for us. And lastly, it's the continuous improvement part when it comes to configuration tuning. It's, make your changes, observe, and then, maybe, I don't know if it's weekly, monthly, quarterly, you're looking at your reporting and your metrics and stuff like that and going, okay, is there anything here that we can improve? And you just continue on like that. Those are the basics of config tuning. Okay, so let's dive into something directly useful. Kind of the 80-20 rule here. What kind of stuff can we do right off the bat to get the biggest bang for the buck? I know Derek touched on this when he pointed out, like on EDB's site, recommendations for some of the parameters. So I want to touch on those too, because they matter. They really do matter. I once walked into a customer that they had thrown 330 gigs of RAM at their server, and it still sucked. And all we had to do was set the effective cache size to be 75% of the RAM, and suddenly the database knew how much breathing space it had. It thought it was breathing through a straw, when in fact, it had like a large pipe it could have used. So these parameters are a great place to start. The shared buffers, of course, we usually want about a quarter of the RAM. Effective cache size, it's important to know that is not committed memory. So you don't have to worry that, like, all of a sudden 75% of your RAM went to this effective cache thing. It's just for the planner, for all intents and purposes. Maintenance work mem. So this is rule of thumb kind of stuff. Usually we would have as a starting point with production servers 6 auto vacuum max workers. More often than not, that was just fine. I'm not saying that you won't find that maybe someday you start cranking that up, but 6 was usually fine. So we'd take 15% of the RAM and divide it by 6. This is going to affect the speed of your vacuums, your analyzes, your index creation, all that kind of fun stuff. So having this set properly is important to the overall health of your system. Now, lastly, in the work mem setting here, this one is kind of important, and I just want to be a little careful about it, because I feel like things are a little cloudy for me right now with regard to how we operate our graph nodes. The rule of thumb is, you can see here, 25% of the RAM divided by max connections. Now, we have a situation that Letter and I are just now getting to have conversations about, where, as far as edge and node stuff goes, we have these huge max connection settings, like 1,000, that is way outside the community, what the community, Postgres community thinks is rational. Ideally, it's, one connection per CPU, but who has the money for that? So you start to get into the 2, maybe 3 per CPU space. And beyond that, you want to have a pooler in front of it. But we have pooling within the graph node itself. And so this is why I'm saying a lot about this one, maybe too much, is that I want to be careful about saying that there's just some blanket calculation here. In that, how many max connections should you have? I don't know how your systems are running. I can't be certain what to recommend here. I'm trying to get us down, I hope, to something like, I'm going to say 400 or less, and use that as our number, 400 for each shard, because we're not running like 𝗨𝗀𝗃𝗀 in between, or 𝗨𝗃𝗀𝗃 or something in between a graph node and Postgres. And I know, I remember a letter saying something, pardon me, about, there were some things about how 𝗨𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃 pooled that he didn't particularly love or was concerned about, I think, interacting with a graph node. So I don't want to touch that. Okay, but that said, workman is important because every operation in a query you can get this much RAM for itself. So we go with this rule of thumb on a per connection basis because you don't actually know how many operations a particular query will have at one time. And to beat this horse to death, the reason that it's important you ease into this is that I had a customer once that is a furniture brand that probably most of you know, and they didn't listen to the warning to not implement things wholesale. They did this, and unbeknownst to them, they had an abomination of a query with many order by statements in it that shouldn't have been there anyway, and every one of those ate up RAM. So it ate up all the RAM in the machine, and Postgres was still alive, but the whole machine was frozen, basically. So that's my word of warning, and we'll move on. Okay, dropping unused indexes. I mean it when I say this. If you get nothing else from today besides this, you're still winning. Because of the nature, and I know you guys have talked about this before, but the nature of what we do, how we slap an index on absolutely everything when it's created, because we kind of have no choice, right? We just don't know the access patterns yet. But we end up with tremendous overhead of unused indexes. And I wanted to get examples together, but I didn't have time. But it is not at all uncommon for me to drop all the indexes on a particular subgraph, which, of course, in our world translates to a schema. I would go into a schema, I would drop all the unused indexes, and that would cut like the entire size of that schema by 1/3 to 1/2. And it's not just about the size. There is a tremendous amount of overhead involved in maintaining every index, whether it's used or not. You can imagine every single time you insert or change something in the table, if you've got like 30 indexes, every single one of those needs to be updated. So the overhead is tremendous. And that also causes a significant load on the whole auto vacuum process, which that's something that you just always want to hum along nicely. As long as auto vacuum is happy, then you're going to be happy because it can keep up with stuff and your database will run much better without really much involvement from you. So this is something that I'm hoping to put something together to automate the dropping of unused indexes for Edge and Node. And whatever lessons learned I get out of that, I'd be happy to share it. And maybe there's something we will come up with as a community that we go, hey, you know what? This is something we all should be running on a periodic basis. So that's a big one. It really will impact the speed of each schema and the size and speed of your database. Moving on, disk layout. A little more work, but it's worth it if you've got the time, and it won't cause you a lot of downtime, I should say. One of the things we always used to recommend, and I still do to this day, I've never seen it harm anything, and it's always benefited me, was to simply change the OS read ahead for your diff. It's going to increase the I/O throughput because you got a reduced number of requests. So this was one that was always like at the top of the recommendations for pretty much everybody I ever worked with or for, was to make this change. But again, try it, see how it goes for you. You can do it on the fly with echoing it into your settings here, but you're going to need to put it into RC local to make it permanent. So that's kind of a quick potential speed gain. Architecturally, this was one that if you've got this option, I highly recommend, is that put your wall files on one volume and your data files on another, because you don't want them competing with each other for the disk at all. And PG wall, it used to be PGXlog, that should be on your fastest index. I'm sorry, on your fastest disk, because that's, when the database is committing stuff, it's hitting the wall file, and it's not until checkpoints that it gets written out to the data files. So PG wall, fast disk, PG data, fast disk. Doesn't have to be as fast as PG wall, so you don't have to go nuts on spending for that. But I think, spend on it. Just PG wall needs to be the fastest, and PG wall doesn't have to be huge. A little side note, I always considered a large PG wall, like a terabyte, as a safety net, so that if things started filling up for some unknown reason, and it shouldn't, but if it did, it gave us time to react before that wall volume filled up. Because you don't want that to happen, or the database kind of goes until you take care of that, and it's not pleasant. Let's put it that way. And mount with no A time. Keeping track of that on a database disk is just pointless because the database doesn't need to know it. So just another little reduction in overhead. Nice to haves: put your indexes in their own table spaces and the table space on its own disk. So that way the lookups are happening on a different volume than where the data is, when it needs to go read it. Not necessary, and maybe a little more work than you might want to do at this point. But hey, if you're constructing something new, or you're trying to speed something up, this might be a nice win. So give that a shot sometime. PG log, this isn't as impactful, but I always like to have it on its own volume, or maybe the OS volume. I didn't want writing to the logs competing with any other database operations, so that's why I would throw it here. There's so many parameters that we don't have the time to get into them today. I mean, we got a lot of questions yet to go, but we can talk about these another time. Maybe we'll do them within Discord or another presentation or something. And I'd be happy to share the defaults that I usually start with for a production server for these. But wall, auto vacuum, background writer, all that fun stuff, they do have an impact on performance, and they're really just a configuration change. So these are things that, happy to share them, but let's not go down that rabbit hole today. I'm going to try and keep it a little more 101 today. Similarly with kernel parameters, yes, there are a few that we could work with, things like swappiness and huge pages and whatever, overcommitting memory, blah blah blah. But now these are things that I used to use at a point in time when I was doing a lot more of my own kind of like bare metal, or maybe an EC2 at AWS kind of stuff. So I don't want to just throw them out there and go, hey, yeah, go implement these. I don't know where the community is at on these recently enough to recommend them, but I would still be happy to share them as a point of reference. So, okay, moving on. Monitoring tools. Go ahead.
Just a quick one, John. So we've got a couple of questions in the chat. So I just wanted to interject, as you mentioned.
Please, yeah.
Cool with that. And also, if we don't get through all these questions, what I think we would be really cool is if we can split this up into another talk for next week, just so we make sure that we balance the questions in the chat and also the questions here on the screen. So the first one is from Vince saying, do you recommend EDB tuned profile?
I haven't tried it lately. I'll be honest, I would have to look at it to see where it's at. I don't like anything that automatically, or I shouldn't say it that way. I shy away from anything that automatically comes back with these are what your parameters should be. But that said, it is a nice reference point. Run it, see what it gives you, and work from there. But I wouldn't use it. I wouldn't go by it as gospel. However, so yeah, you're sharing. Okay, yeah, I like this. Okay, like yeah, VM swappiness is 10. The dirty expire centiseconds. That's funny that it's 500. We used to recommend 499 to be specific. So yeah, I think these are useful. It's again, use it as a starting point, like the same as the stuff I'm saying today. It's just don't implement it wholesale. On these kernel parameters, test it. Throw them on a system you can test before you just implement them. Is the way I lean. But I've seen plenty of people just do it. YOLO it, and here we go. Are we still tuning our Postgres until today? So, to be honest, we're just getting going with that. I joined Mickey's Merry Band about 3 months ago, and so we are just now reaching a point where, and especially after sunrise and all that kind of thing, to better understand the loads on our system and stuff like that. So yes, we will be doing. You can call them never-ending improvements, but they do slow down. There does come a point where it's like, okay, I probably should look at this in another 6 months, 12 months. Is there anything more to be done? Because really, our goal is to standardize. We want to dial in a particular size and configuration of server and Postgres settings to go with it. That it's like, this is our bread and butter. We'll just keep rolling those out as multiple shards as we go forward. Oh, let's see. Any others on this topic I can quickly get?
Yes,
file systems.
Yes. Best file system still XVS.
Yeah. Okay, I want to be careful about that. I am personally very interested in trying ZFS. I have been for years, but I've never had the opportunity to implement it anywhere because it seems like it'd be a fantastic fit for Postgres, and I've seen presentations at conferences on it. But everything I've ever deployed was either on ext4 or XFS. No issues. The file system was fine. All right. ZFS, you say? Yeah. If anybody's doing that, I'd love to learn to hear about what they're doing. So, all right. So kind of moving on from configuration to the monitoring kind of space, or maybe monitoring, tuning, reporting, all that kind of junk. So we're using Grafana, and as far as I'm aware to date, and I still have a lot to learn, as my comrades will happily share. The Grafana dashboards that we have tend to be homegrown, and what I would like to do is to move more into community created dashboards that we can implement in Grafana. And Crunchy Data, if you're not familiar, they're one of the big core contributors in Postgres, and it is an outstanding Postgres shop. They have kind of got a suite of tools, including PG Badger, which is near and dear to my heart, as you'll soon find out, that are all wrapped up into this PG Monitor thing. And that is what I am looking at with our SREs as maybe what we're going to deploy. Not carved in stone by any stretch, but that's the direction I'm leaning as far as being a selfish DBA. This is what I'd like to see. Now, and again, as a side note, not on topic, but Crunchy Data's PG Backrest is also my bread and butter go-to for backing up and restoring and creating clones and all that kind of stuff of Postgres databases. It's outstanding. It's worked for me for years. Cybertek's got PGWatch 2. I have not used it, but Cybertek, if you're not familiar, they are also very strong in this space. And I would encourage you to follow their CEO's blog. You know, I've been doing specifically Postgres for 10 years, and I'm still going, wow, I had no idea you could do that. That's amazing. You know, and his YouTube presentations and stuff like that from conferences. So Cybertek, another strong player in the space, besides EDB and Crunchy Data. So the reason I think that I suggest taking a look at PG Monitor or these types of tools from the community is that when we ask questions like, what should we be monitoring and that kind of thing? Well, these are tools put together, like assembled, configured, packaged, and all that by people who do nothing but eat and breathe Postgres. The guy, for example, who does PG, maintains PG Monitor essentially for Crunchy, is Keith. Keith is also the author of the PG Partman. He the partitioning extension. So you've got people like this is all that they do. So I love the fact that as a DBA, I can just I know that they're going to have stuff in there that makes or they're useful tools to me that I don't have to roll my own, that kind of thing. So those are thoughts on, and it's free. PG Monitor is free. Those are thoughts on monitoring tools. Okay, flow queries and bottlenecks. Happy fun time. So, all right, if this is a live issue and you're going, oh man, what's choking my database? What's going on? This is where having those Grafana type dashboards and things like that, or maybe you're deployed in like AWS, whatever, you've got some kind of CloudWatch going on. Maybe you're in Google Cloud SQL. They've got all sorts of dashboards built in for their managed service. That's where, you're going to go take a peek in there probably first to see what's going on. Like, is my memory being chewed up? Is it CPU load? That kind of thing. But if you want to get your hands dirty, and this is where I tend to be, I don't use PG Admin 4, but rarely. I'm more of a PSQL command line guy. Not that it's not a great tool, but I just am more at the command line. PG Stat Activity, regardless of which you're using, it's really like a or the go-to, like first stop for what's going on. So because you can query that view to find out, what's idle in transaction, what's waiting, what's all these types of statuses, or maybe the longest running, like when did this start? And it's a nice place to go take a look, poke around and go, so this thing's been running for 8 hours. That's probably not a good thing. So those are things I tend to use for like live troubleshooting. It's a big topic and a lot of it's personal preference. So I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but that's just so you have an idea of what I'm using or where I go at first if I've got a slow database. But otherwise, PG Badger, and PG Badger. Why? All right. If you have not seen PG Badger, it's another free tool. It's essentially like just an unbelievably useful Perl script, a set of Perl scripts, unless they've refactored it in the last few years. And what it does is it chews through your log files. So you can ship your log files off to another server if you'd like, where you've got PG Badger set up, so you're not loading your server, your database. And it will chew through your log files, and it's going to tell you, here's your top end queries by time, top end by frequency. Here's your temp file sizes that are being created on disk. All this kind of stuff. That this is the continuous improvement part. Like if I start to see that we have commonly queries spilling over onto disk and creating temp files, well, that's slow. That's really slow. So should I just increase like the work amount for the entire instance? Well, I can do that in the PostgreSQL.conf file. But you could start, and this is where I'm getting, this is not 101 at this point, but just so you're aware of things, you could potentially do. You can set work mem at like the session level. So you could potentially have something like a dedicated connection that had higher work mem settings for it. But what that does is it then gives this specific thing or everything in the database more room to work, and then it uses more memory. And as long as you've got enough memory, well, great. Now you use less temp files. So that's nice. Oh, and as a side note tip, this is another one that's like, let's call it 201. Something that we used to do a few different sites that I worked at is sometimes if we had enough RAM, we would create a RAM disk, and the RAM disk is where we would set up the table space for temp files. So that way, even if it was spilling into temp files, it was still using RAM, and that was pretty handy, but not 101 level. But so that's why the PG Badger, I think, is one of the most important tools that anybody who's running Postgres could use. It's free. It's free, and it gives you these wonderful HTML reports, and it really helps you dial in, zoom in on what is my database actually doing every day, and how can I improve it. So highly recommend that one. And again, I believe it's part of the suite of that PG Monitor suite of tools that Crunchy Data put together. Okay, let's see. Common causes for, okay, a little shorter on this one. Unused indexes, that'll degrade as you keep having to maintain them and they keep growing along with your data, that is definitely going to degrade your performance. So again, drop unused indexes. And the other low-hanging fruit on this one is if your auto vacuum is not keeping up with its housekeeping. I mean, that's really the way to think of AutoVac. It is taking care of everything, for all the maintenance for you so that the database performs well. So if it's not keeping up with that, and this could be an entire another session, or I would encourage people to, there are tons of great presentations on YouTube and blog articles on auto vacuum, so by smarter people than me. But auto vacuum, if that gets out of whack and can't keep up, things become bloated, which, that's a big performance hit. Poor statistics, that's even worse, because even if you've got an index on something and the statistics are wrong or out of date or inadequate, that index is not going to be very useful to you. And of course, the most important one is, and I know that Letter mentioned this in a previous talk, was transaction ID wraparound is the bane of the Postgres DBA. I mean, if you're not keeping track of that, it can lead to catastrophic failure. Let's just put it that way. I think he talked about, it's a 2 to 32 integer. So it's important to watch. If you see a whole bunch of stuff in your log files about, emergency vacuum to prevent transaction ID wraparound, I would dig into that. I would keep an eye on that. That's important. But a lot of these dashboards I've seen, they have that in there. It shows you where you're at on those transaction IDs so that you can easily keep an eye on it or set up an alert or something. Okay. Should we invest time in learning to optimize? No, not really. I mean this kind of tongue in cheek in that, so you don't really, in Oracle, yeah, you had hints. You could give hints to the planner, but that's not really a thing in Postgres. So the idea of optimizing query execution plans isn't something we can really do. Okay. But that said, what can you do in that direction? So it's important, I think, to use. I thought I had a link in here somewhere. If I didn't, I'll get it to you guys. But there's a really popular site, 𝗨𝗀𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂.com. I'll get you that link. But it's a nice site where you can just throw in another site out there. It's kind of the classic one that's been around forever. You can throw in your explain analyze plan that the query planner spits out, and it'll give you a nice visual of here's where you're losing the most time. So learning to be able to, or at least having a familiarity with the output of explain analyze and or what you're getting out of PG Badger, those are the things that are going to help you understand, okay, should I throw an index on this thing? What kind of index should it be? or with PG Badger kind of reporting, should I change work mem? These types of things that are going to help you improve your performance because you're not directly able to tell the planner, this is what I want you to do. And now there are other things we can talk about for doing that. Like I did recently have to crank up the statistics on specific columns in a specific table to finally get this thing to use the index. But that's a whole nother level of digging into stuff. So we'll maybe talk about that another time. Okay, and yes, there are config settings that we can play with in PostgreSQL.conf. I think turning on and off things with enable, like turning off sequential scans and stuff like that. I don't think I've ever found a benefit for using any of these unless it was for a specific test case. And that I never did in production. Because if you turn off like sequential scans or something, and that turned out to be the only way or the best way that the database was going to get data for everything else that was happening on it at that time, it's not a good thing. Let's just leave it at that. These, though, the cost parameters, you could look at dialing those in. And again, that's more 201 or higher level, I guess I'll call it. Because let's get more bang for our buck by just configuring the database, tweaking it and architecting it better. And then maybe looking at some of those cost parameters. I'm not saying you shouldn't. And if you're one of the more advanced folks with this, have at it. You can definitely get a benefit out of it. All right. So on a related note, this is again like kind of you don't set up the planner's statistics. You can affect it, but this again is in terms of like what I just alluded to, a specific case where we had a really slow query. Why? Create an index on it, still not using it. Oh, okay. Finally, I set the statistics specifically for that table and those columns to a much higher value than the default for the database. I ran vacuum analyze again, and now it finally used the index. So this isn't something that you really are going to be playing with much, if ever. It's a really specific use case in my opinion, but I could definitely be proven wrong on that. It's just my experience to date. Again, this is the most important, the stats that they're up to date because your auto vacuum is working, that everything's getting analyzed. Now, I've had plenty of instances where we've had, tables that just get the snot beat out of them all day long with updates and stuff. And if you have some kind of a lull in your daily use pattern, like when the servers are a little quieter, you could consider using either cron in the OS or PG cron to run jobs that manually, maybe for the moment, they change all the statistics on that table, they run analyze, and then they reset to the default statistics, that kind of stuff. You can get pretty fancy with it to address your busiest stuff, or things that really need some TLC, and then set it and forget it. So, let's see. Okay, yeah, we touched on that. Now, you don't usually need to crank them up for the entire instance, and it's definitely a point of diminishing returns, because then if you increase your statistics targets for the entire database, that's a lot of processing time and a lot of storage for the database to manage all that. Okay, how are we doing on time here? We're just about done. I think I'm running too long, aren't I?
You're doing fine. We have a couple of questions in the chat. I'm not sure how many of them you answered, so maybe in the remaining couple of minutes that we have, we could go through those if you're up for that. And then with the questions that we have here, we could park some time for next week to follow up with them.
Okay, yeah, sure. That sounds good.
Yeah. Okay.
All
Awesome.
right, where should we start?
So I'm not sure how many of these you answered. So I'll go up to, let's say, for example, Vince. Vince posted a link here and he said, what do you think about the tool like this? It looks like it's some sort of GitHub link for PostgreSQL tuner, some sort of PostgreSQL tuner.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you see that one?
Yeah, I see that. So, okay. I'm kind of neutral on that one as well. As I said, I shy away from like just implement these kind of tools. It's if you want to run it and let it give you suggestions, recommendations, that kind of thing. Certainly, have at it. The you know my former colleagues that I still talk to on Slack, we talk Postgres almost daily. None of us have a warm, fuzzy feeling about these tuning scripts, but everybody acknowledges, hey, time and effort went into these, and they do produce some useful advice or starting points, especially if you don't know where to go from. So it still ends up being almost a non-answer and kind of neutral here, but I guess just like your mileage may vary, be careful. Just implement it slowly. Don't go nuts with it. Okay, moving down. Yes, my gists are indeed ancient. There's no doubt. I've only recently resurrected my GitHub. All right. Moving on. One more question. Okay, table blocks has not been auto analyzed for 10 days. There's an it depends. It depends on the activity on that table. If this thing hasn't been being updated frequently, that might be fine. If it's been analyzed and it hasn't had a ton of updates, and then there are settings that determine what is a ton of updates. Sometimes you do that by percentage of rows in the table before it needs to be auto vacuumed. Sometimes you do it in other ways, but yeah, it's a maybe. I would look at it. I would check into it and go, hey, is this a table that does or does not get updated frequently? If it does and it hasn't been auto-analyzed in 10 days, then I would start looking into, well, maybe I'll run vacuum analyze on this manually, and at least that'll get the statistics up to date. And then maybe dig in further to go, well, why wasn't this getting analyzed? Is it my auto vacuum settings? Oh, and I see Derek has already chimed in on that. So, yep, exactly. This one from Vince: with indexing for JIT off, is it wise to have read replica queries with JIT on? I told you somebody would stump me. I do not know. I'd have to look into that one. Yep. Okay. That's a new one for me. Thanks, Vince. You get the stump me award. Didn't take much, but let's see. Moving on. Matthew. Oh, to the indexers. Okay. And I think, there's a stump. Man, you guys are good with your memes. You're quick. Okay, yeah. So I think that's where we're caught up with the questions or close to it.
That's correct. Yeah. I feel like with with Postgres stuff, everybody is so interested in this topic and making sure that they're doing the right thing. So we've been doing a couple of sessions like this in the past. I anticipate that we'll continue. So what makes sense is that the questions that we have here, maybe we could follow up with next week. And please, more sessions. Yeah, 100%. There's overwhelming demand for these kinds of sessions, so rest assured they will keep continuing to come. It's great to see that people are getting a ton of value from them. Yeah, thanks for affirming that, Matthew. Maybe we'll wrap up with this last question from Marc Andre. Let's see. Yeah, do you want to tackle that one, John?
Where was that one? I didn't see it. Can you read it?
Yes, it's just come in above Matthew.
Oh, there it is. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Got it?
Good streaming.
Yeah.
Okay. Third party or PG native. Okay. For streaming replication, I have never done anything but synchronous. I always wanted my read replica up to date. Now, there were settings that sometimes, depending on what the business's needs were, you might consider having like the primary doesn't need confirmation that it's been written on the replica, before the primary considers the transaction committed. So that can speed things up on the primary, but there's that remote chance that, hey, you know, the replica, if the primary died and something hadn't made it to the replica yet, well, you're a little SOL at that point. But that depends on your business requirements. And I also I've never used anything other than PG native replication. And I'll be brutally honest, I don't know about a third party type of replication. I know that there are tools that will manage the native. You know, it'll help you set it up and do all of it for you. But I take that back a little bit. You know, there are things in the community like EDB's got the bidirectional replication and things like that. But I'm not thinking in terms of that. I'm always thinking of my replica as, how can I do it for free? I want to be able to use it as a read replica, and I usually want to be able to fail over to it in the case of an emergency. So I use it as a hot standby as well. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Cool.
Amazing, amazing. I don't know if you noticed earlier, there was another kind of praise to you as well for answering the question diligently. I think you've done a fantastic job of going through these questions here and making sure that you're answering them as well as the ones in the chat. So really do appreciate you coming along, John. This was fantastic.
Hey, I enjoyed it, and you know, I genuinely, I don't know how much time I'm going to have to commit to this moving forward, but there will be time. Let's put it that way. I know Mickey's already, you know, made that a point for me. So I'm looking forward again, like I started this whole thing out, to working with all of you, and who knows, maybe we'll even have a separate channel here in Discord for database someday. But like, to just talk Postgres, how are we doing this? How can we make this better? And all win as a result. That's kind of what I'm thinking. So.
Amazing, amazing. Well, yeah, let's get those plans in motion. I really do appreciate your time, and appreciate everyone here for making it out today. As we mentioned, we'll do a follow-up next week, and make sure you grab your POAP, which was posted earlier in the chat. Thank you, everyone. This was fantastic. We're getting a lot of love in the chat, and we'll see you again same time next week. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.